Hey, welcome back to the Tales of an FDS and Rumblings and Remardan. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, or actually pick up a copy on Amazon, or a copy of the sequel Deviations of Defiance, and I'll have a compilation of short stories coming up later this month of June 2020. But for now, we are reading Rumblings and Remardan. And we are currently on Chapter 12, Precipice. Stepanus breathed hard as his stumpy legs climbed up the high, human-made stairs, upwards to join in the thick of battle for the wall. Gruesome shouts spread out as both man and dwarf were being stifled and killed in the fighting. Stepanus realized that they weren't even all the way through these people yet. The humans were being pushed back along the ramparts, but still there was no sign of swift victory. They had a squat tower in which their stature and the height gave a highly unfair advantage to them. Metal clanged upon metal as the two fighting forces engaged one another in a struggle to the death. High Commander Airlock was nowhere to be seen amongst his own men when Stepanus made his way from the ground up onto the ramparts. He was tired out from all this unnecessary fighting. Why couldn't these savages see that they had already lost? There was no point in fighting at this stage in the battle. They only produced more pain for everyone involved. The steward clenched his armor up for the expectant battle that was raging in this last holdout. He stretched out with his axe at the ready to charge into the enemy. The hardened plate armor affixed to his shoulders were resisting any blows from the humans' iron-tipped spears with little effort, but he could tell that his men were almost as tired as he himself was. There was no way through the dwarven line that he could see. Stepanus wasn't particularly looking to fight, but he knew his duty to carry out the surrender of the city, and he'd be damned if that was hindered at all. Stepanus pushed into the back lines of his men, who were struggling to reach the top of the stairs. He pulled the farthest one aside and shouted above the din, "Who's in command here, soldier?" The dwarf had a glazed-over look on his face below his bloodied helmet. He held his axe at the ready still. His shield notched itself into his arm, as if he thought that Stepanus would land more than a verbal blow on him. He was young, and responded as such with a light, airy voice for a dwarf. "The commander sent us to take this tower at all costs. He's somewhere else on the ground, sir." Stepanus shook his head in disbelief. Airlock was tasked with specifically taking the walls, and he was now out of sight. There was no time to be worried about what he would do to the commander. The high seneschal moved on to occupy his mind with the more important matters of finishing this job. Well, he must be doing something important, I hope, he thought to himself. The dwarf quickly grabbed the 5 backmost members of this assault squad and pulled them to the stairs for a briefing. Stepanus looked them over absent-mindedly. They were lucky, all in their mid-70s, men who had seen plenty of action fighting underground, but still had their youth about them to be agile in a handy fight. "All right, lads, everyone take a breather, drink some water, get a little rested. I want you 5 to disrobe down to your gambesons after. I'll find some rope and hooks, and you boys will climb right up behind those fuckers in the tower and unleash hell so we can push through on this side." Stepanus said this, and then he went about learning their names now, in order to decorate them afterwards if they survived. But he knew that they probably wouldn't make it at all. Ulan, Kiris, Yevon, Wint, Neith. These were the names he had to remember for their families after this tragedy had played out. He leaned back against the slice of parapet and watched as these soldiers helped each other out of their armor. It was clunky and hard to do, but they managed it and went on to drink greedily from their canteens. Stepanus slowly got up and walked back down the stairs to the ground, where he was greeted by soldiers down there who had started to coalesce around the gatehouse. The steward found the company quartermaster and seized 5 lengths of rope and 5 grappling hooks from him. The dwarf was more than happy to part with the things he was lugging around. After all, the quartermaster was tired, and those were heavy. Then Stepanis grabbed another 2 soldiers to share the burden with him back up the stairs. Even still, Stepanis struggled, as the other 2 kept walking right past him up to the top. He made several breaks trying to get up there, and when he did, the men assigned to the task were more than rested for it now. Stepanis reached for the flask at his own belt. He swallowed up a large gulp of the fiery vodka that it held. He made a sour face which shook his whole body before coming to the command of himself once again. The old dwarf was never a fan of any alcohol, but sometimes it was necessary to make it through the day, and this day had been an inexorably long one. He had expected it to be, which is why the flask hung full at his belt, still, apart from his long swig. Stepanis readied himself up and said, "All right, men, you're each going to grapple up there and take them by surprise, so try to be quiet about it." A succinct, "Sir, yes, sir," was the response. That's all he needed as the men started to twirl these hooks in the air one by one. They made a pleasing hum as they gained speed and finally left their hands to fly off into the air and clip into the stoneworks of the tower. The noise of the hooks biting their teeth into the parapet was overtaken by the sounds of fighting going on down below. The majority of defenders were occupied with surviving the ravaged onslaught of the dwarves. The first of those men swung out, quickly followed in succession from the other. It was a comical sight for any onlooker to watch the dwarves fly through the air onto the sides of this stone tower. Their axe blades were wrapped tightly around their backs, ready to spring forward and cut down the closest of the human defenders at the top. They started their way upwards to the execution of their tasks. Their gambesons showed through with sweat, as the arms of each and every soldier on that great climb upward strained in magnificent defiance to gravity. The clanging from the battle on the parapets continued to grow, with several more casualties on the dwarven side from the height of vantage that the humans held. Stepanis shook his head in disgust whenever any dwarf pulled back in defense at the spears thrusting, trying to break through their armor. At least the dwarven attackers were able to descend on the undefended legs of these damned humans. Why couldn't they accept that a better race had come to rule them peaceably? Stepanis hated all of this fighting. It was incredibly unnecessary in his opinion. Things would have been so much simpler to do a quick show of force and puppet the state, rule it from below the ground. His head hurt being this far up. It started to ache from even being on top of this deadly wall. He couldn't imagine how those soldiers were able to scale up onto the tower. They had gone through the constant goblin wars, and the wars of coalescing the dwarves under the one true king, Coleus. There were plenty of times that this army had climbed over walls before, but Stepanis couldn't imagine how these men were doing it under this immense blue sky. These 5 had real courage. If any of them survived, he'd make sure they'd receive as much vodka, women, and booze as they wanted. They'd have the highest honorific, the Axe of Gorgonus, placed on each of their chests by King Coleus himself. These men would be praised, the kingdom open up to them. These typical soldiers would become celebrated throughout the realm. That is, if they survived. Stepanis mused on what would happen if they didn't. If all of them died, then he might suggest a lesser title to be received by them. Not many people cared what was on the chest of a cadaver. The families would be devastated, no doubt, if they had families. Stepanis didn't know this. He might grant the fallen heroes something like the Red Heart of Courage. Yes, he thought, Many brave men will have fallen today. Why should such a higher metal be wasted on the dead? Pragmatic as always. Stepanus pondered on this subject as he watched these brave dwarves almost reach the top. This was the turning point. If they made it over unseen and unnoticed, then the plan would come to fruition. If not, well, there goes 5 heroes awarded the Red Heart of Courage. The Lord Seneschal let out a battle cry to distract the defenders of that gloomy tower. For Gorgonus! Death to the humans! These shouts were soon picked up by the soldiers on the parapets fighting to gain the upper hand in the struggle. Their voices reverberated over the walls and splashed down into the streets. Below, where some residents of the city had come to watch this struggle, those people soon ran back indoors to anywhere they could avoid the dwarven onslaught and survive with their hides intact. The distraction was enough to allow the climbers to catch the defenders off guard at the top of the tower. Stepanus only heard the excess destruction that they caused in those humans. After scaling the tower, those 5 dwarves all made it up and joined in the battle cry together with their soldiers. It created a grand cacophony of voices to dissuade the enemy of any resistance that they might have put up. The dwarves all swung harder. They threw themselves with all their might into the enemy. The 5 at the top slashed irreverently at the backs of those who were unfortunate enough to be in the last rank. The first blows were easy and succinct. Axe chop right into the center of their backs. Each human spear spurted in defiance to the blade that now sucked up all their life. The surprise was so great that they had no time to react. The only possible outcome for these men was to die, clutching their wounds in one last chance at life. The humans quickly were felled on both sides as they started to realize there was an attack on their flank. Tactics and maneuvers had utterly decimated their height advantage. Few dwarves were slain from then on at the Battle of the Tower. There was so much confusion and chaos in the ranks of the defenders that they were easily defeated without any major casualties occurring. No more were the dwarves hindered from taking those outer walls. Stepanus made damn sure to tell all those other squads together throughout the city to follow their example. Simply climb the towers from the outside, and there was no problem. After gutting the innards from this once great capital, Stepanus went about skinning it to get rid of the fleas that had once infested the entire place. There were only a few more things to be done, and this long day would finally reach its conclusion. Stepanus exhaled, after climbing from the parapets to issue his commands to the runners, to take to all of the soldiers around the city. It was nice for him to finally be off that damned vertical death trap. He'd decided that he had had enough of running and fighting for the day. There were soldiers and military leaders to do that sort of thing for this Dvarnin. The steward wandered through the ruined streets back towards the castle hall, where his king awaited his return. Devastation continued to work its way on all sides of his path. The fires had subsided quite a bit, though. No longer were the brilliant orange flames shooting out from the simple wooden buildings. Why didn't they carve it out of stone? Wood burns so quickly and with everyone inside. Well, at least it's better for us. Stepanus thought these things cynically as he passed another square with looters from the half-burnt-out apartment buildings. These squalid humans disgusted the older dwarf. It was as if they had given up on life so easily. Whenever they had tried to sack a dwarven city, before the time of coalescence, every man, woman, and child fought for their clan. These humans gave up so quickly. Stepanus wasn't surprised when he thought about it more. They probably realized that these new creatures were here to take their proper places in the world. These humans were all ready to bow and kneel before their new masters. To the common folk, it didn't mean much. They traded a human overlord for one that's smaller than themselves. Sure, that would come as an ego blow to their species, but it made sense in the long run after he would implement the measures to beat it into their skulls. They would need little time to decide between the literal rod and the figurative carrot. Yes, he thought, we'll have them begging for table scraps soon enough. Those humans who didn't have either the balls or the decency to take from their neighbors simply cowered on the streets or in the squares holding one another. It was a pitiful sight to behold. Bedraggled children being clutched at by their mothers, and the fathers who were too frightened to take back what was rightfully theirs, or even think of striking at the dwarven invaders. Stepanus retraced his steps to get back to the very heart of the city. He walked around the newly formed piles of bodies that were strewn about haphazardly. The iron-encrusted air surrounded Stepanus on all sides, while he was saluted by roaming squads of dwarven soldiers passing by. The stench had started to turn his stomach over in all directions, but he still continued on his way. The steward was deeply disheartened and annoyed at the constant cries that reached out from the wailing women all over the city. They seemed to join together as one great funeral dirge that was being played without his permission. It was an affront and assault upon his senses. The dwarf curled up his face in one of discontent at having to be the de facto leader for the army. He had given commands, and those would be followed through to the letter, or else he would have heads rolling. Commander Airlock was already in Stepanus's mind's eye, as the best and prime example of someone who had displeasured the crown. Where the hell did that bastard run off to, he thought. A soldier who leaves his post gains a court-martial as a result and normally winds up executed. Would it be the same for the Supreme Commander? The soldier better be doing something important elsewhere in the battlegrounds. Stepanus reminded himself not to look up again. It was disorienting to come from the underground as they had, but the constant fighting that had taken his and a lot of others' minds off of the thought that there was nothing above them. Still, it was frightful to see there was no ceiling. Stepanus slicked back his hair with the sweat and sweat accumulated from the day's toil. At least he had avoided getting any blood on him for the most part. The steward was only slightly bleeding from several cuts he had received during the fighting. He was slowing down even more from the fatigue that was building up inside of him. Stepanus made frequent stops to catch his breath and take a view of where he was traveling through. The buildings all around started to take on a better shape. They began to look sturdier than the previous ones. Some were even made out of stone. The creeping sense that he was about to get to his destination made leaps with the more color on these houses. Soldiers began to file past more often as well. The lowering sun glimmered among the ever-shifting silhouettes of these powerfully built dwarfs. Humans were seen less and less as he proceeded past the various cordons that had been set up in the intervening hours since the beginning of their invasion into the world. Those soldiers who now took the place of guards saluted accordingly when they saw his ornate metalwork pass by. They let Stepanus through unquestioningly. The dwarven seneschal appreciated all that these people did for their nation. It wasn't often that the mountain dwarves saw the free-flowing open sky, and these men had just fought a victorious battle underneath it. They were the marching machine of war that succeeded wherever they went. Still, Stepanus and King Coelius had no desire for the word of their arrival into the above lands to spread to the other kingdoms nearby. It would do them no good if they had to fight another war so soon after victory was just in their grasp. The city had to be cut off. No one would be able to leave in the immediate future. Maybe after several years, once things had settled down, and the dwarves had truly congealed their bleeding authority, then it would be time to expand further. These plans circled through Stepanus' head fully before he chased them out with another salute, and then finally at the main castle once again. The castle area had now completely changed. Rows upon rows of tents had been set up for the army. Orderlies were milling and running about, fulfilling the requests of their superiors. The immense halls still remained where there were parties streaming to and fro to pull out new supplies for the occupation that was to come. Little else was done to prevent soldiers from bustling about on the orders of their superiors. The steward had almost forgotten about his former bodyguard, Hadrius, when that gruff dwarf appeared from under the shade of the tents nearby. He had with him a large wooden keg of ale, marked out as a requisition for the steward. He appeared in a somewhat happy mood from the distance that Stepanus peered at him. Stepanus, however, was in no mood at all for fun and games. He was hungry and angry, and a little bit thirsty. It was a brilliant idea for Hadrius to be carrying that ale at a time like this. The bodyguard who had disappeared now swaggered over jauntily to an unamused Stepanus. The seneschal said, "And where the hell were you, Hadrius? I could have used your help with taking that section of wall. Were you at least successful in saving any humans from their own idiocy?" Hadrius bowed magnificently while hoisting that keg from one arm to the other. "Successful? I'd say this is more than that. The boys were able to save a bunch of those Humy scum as you ordered, sir." He did a twirl with the barrel in his fists around his head. "The boys also found this, a tavern unlikely enough caught on fire. This just so happened to be liberated from the flames there. It seems a brand new cask of ale was found somewhere in there." Stepanus sighed a long breath from the depths of his being. He regained and reined in his headache for the prospect of this new prize. The steward's temples still pounded, but at least he was no longer angry at seeing his friend. Stepanus smiled weakly as he said, "Well, I'm glad they could save something of value out of those places. Set it down over there. We'll crack it open together. Good find. And go find us some food to go with it. Oi! I'm tired." It was a very good find. Hadrius set the keg down on a table nearby after clearing it off of other utensils. He did a quick curtsy and said, "Aye, aye, your majesty." He scuttled off quickly after making a smirk at the seneschal. Stepanus found his chair waiting folded up near the campfire that was now blazing at his tent. He undid it and fell apart onto it. Stepanus pulled off the axe from his back and let it slide to the ground. His stomach rumbled in anticipation of whatever food would be brought by Hadrius. Hadrius returned quickly, holding 2 plates laden with all manner of sausages and meat pies. The aroma sent him back to the days after the Great Coalescence in the underworld. The feast went on for weeks after all of the clans had been brought together under King Coelius. It was a time with an unforeseen ridiculousness of food at the ready for all people to enjoy. The Gersogs and the Dvarnin of the dwarves ate all manner of stuffed pork and mushroom everything. Mushroom pie, mushroom drinks, mushroom soup. The list really was endless. So much food it made his stomach turn and gained him at least 30 pounds in that short amount of time. Yes, that time was a good time to be a dwarf. Hadrius now sat down to start this banquet with his newfound friend. They grabbed their iron mugs and filled them to the brim with the fresh ale. The suds foamed over the sides and down their hands. Stepanus's eyes lit up with glee for this treat. They raised their mugs together, and the seneschal said, And what should we toast to, Hadrius? The soldier thought for a moment. What do you think? Of course, either to King Coelius or to a successful invasion. Well, that's a hard one. None of this would be possible without the king. So let's raise our glasses to King Coelius. To King Coelius! Their mugs clanked together in agreement to a satisfying saying. Stepanus downed half of his ale in one go. His mouth tingled in response to this delicious pleasure. He took a second to breathe and fill his lungs before drinking the rest of the cup. A bitter taste ran throughout the ale. Stepanus frowned then and said, "Oi! They must use a lot of hops in this part of the world, but it sure does taste good." He rubbed his belly in agreement with his own opinion. Hadrius took it a little slower. He only sipped the ale a bit. "You're right. We'll have to teach them the correct way to do it. And I thought humans couldn't do anything well. Tone down the hop usage and increase the wheat. That'll make this the best." "Ha," Stepanus said. "Since when did you know anything about ale? Make it into a good vodka any day and I'll be happy with it." "Wait a second. Were you a brewer?" Hadrius beamed with pride as Stepanus filled his mug again and ate one of those mushroom pies. "Yes, sir. Well, didn't own any tavern, but I worked on one. Became pretty good at it, too." Stepanus laughed with his friend at thinking about the good old days. He drank a little bit more, and before he knew it, he had knocked out. It all went black. And that is the end to chapter 12 of Rumblings and Remardan, called Precipice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share it, and pick up a copy for yourself or a friend. There's ebooks and there's also the paperbacks. And I have the sequel out for this. It's Deviations of Defiance. That's up on Amazon as well. And I'll have a compilation of short stories coming up in the same world. But until next time, have a good one.